Hello and good morning. We are Adrià and Marta, and today we are going to talk about food insecurity in South Sudan. So, first of all, we are going to do a little contextualization about this new country. Then, we are going to talk about the ethnicities and civil war. After that, we are going to focus on a specific security approach, which is food security. Then we are going to talk about the humanitarian aid and the responsibility to protect. And finally, we are going to do some conclusions.
South Sudan is a country located in the northeastern part of Africa. Its capital is Juba, and it has a population approximately of 11 million inhabitants. South Sudan became independent on the 9th of July 2011, making South Sudan the youngest country in the world. This nation, however, has been in the bottom 20 countries of the Global Peace Index since its existence, making of South Sudan one of the most dangerous countries in the world. To understand the current conflict ongoing in South Sudan is needed to understand where South Sudan comes from. Before South Sudan became an independent country, it was attached to the Republic of Sudan. Sudan was and still is a pluriethnic country. The problems, however, began on 1950 when the British rule left Sudan, concentrating the power in the northern part of the country. And as you can see in the map, that part is predominantly Arab. This concentration of power woke up an ethnic rivalry, and as a reaction, the southern part forgot its differences and they decided to present a united front to face the Arabic power. As a consequence, and after a lot of years of civil war, on January 2011, a referendum took place, in which a 98.8% of the votes were pro-independence. Thus, on the 9th of July 2011, South Sudan became to an existence.
South Sudan is home of more than 60 different ethnic groups. The majority of them are of African heritage, who practice either Christianity or other traditional religions. The two principal ethnicities are the Dinka and the Nuers. On the one hand, the Dinka is the largest ethnic group, comprising about 36% of the total population. South Sudan's first president, Salva Kiir, is from Dinka heritage. On the other hand, the Nuer comprise about 16% of the total population, and South Sudan's first vice president, Riek Machar, is from Nuer heritage. The conflict between these two ethnicities is historic. That is why, when the country became independent, they decided to put a Dinka and a Nuer to work together, showing how they embrace the different ethnicities. However, in 2013, Salva Kiir accused Riek Machar of planning a failed coup and sacked him. Riek Machar seized control over several regional towns and a civil war broke out. So, 2013 civil war was between the forces loyal to the President Kiir and the supporters of Machar, known as the rebels. Both groups encouraged violence against their civilians through exploiting the ethnic differences, mobilizing sectarian militias, and having their allies use hate speech. In 2016, the UN Commission on Human Rights claimed that the process of ethnic cleansing was underway in several parts of the country, which President Salva Kiir denied. However, it is well known how starvation, the burning of villages, and rape were used as weapons of war across the country. An example of ethnic cleansing is the region of Yei, in which Kiir forces were burning villages and slaughtering men, women, and children, creating the largest exodus of civilians in Africa since the Rwandan genocide in 1994. More than 1 million people have now fled to Uganda, and mostly are from the Yei region. In August 2018, President Kiir signed a power-sharing agreement with Riek Machar and other opposition groups in a bid to end the civil war. However, it was not until the 22nd February 2020 when Machar was finally sworn in, as him and Kiir agreed to move forward with this power-sharing agreement and a coalition government. However, as UN reports, the current peace is extremely fragile. High-level corruption is rampant, militias are being armed, and civilians deliberately starve. Its citizens are still facing huge instability, arguing that those power sharing agreements are not working. For example, the 20th of May of this year, hundreds of people were killed in intercommunal clashes. The war has caused that more than 4 million people are being displaced and about 2.5 million are fleeing to neighboring countries. Nowadays, the combination of food shortages, climate shocks, deepening economic crisis, insecurity, conflict, and insufficient agricultural production have provoked that an approximate 55% of the South Sudanese population is in risk of facing severe food insecurity, according to the latest Integrated Food Security Phase classification. Food insecurity is defined as the state of being without reliable access to sufficient quantity of affordable, nutritious food. In this specific case, millions of South Sudanese civilians are being deliberately deprived of access to basic services and many deliberately starve, while national revenues have been diverted by the country's politicians. Millions of dollars have been diverted from the National Revenue Authority, depleting resources that could have been used to protect, fulfill, and promote the vital economic, social, and cultural rights of South Sudanese civilians.
Concerning the international response on the South Sudanese conflict, it has to be noted the high cost of deployment and distribution of the humanitarian aid. Volunteers have died due to the violence in the country. Also, high degrees of corruption cause a huge misuse of the aid. It is really hard to distribute the aid because of the bureaucracy processes, corruption, violence, but also because when it rains, there's no access to the 70% of the country. As we can see in the left bluish map, the need of humanitarian aid is widespread throughout the country, and some of the regions where the aid is most needed is also really hard to access, as we can see in the map on the right. Thus, the distribution has to be easy for the humanitarian aid to success because the obstacles are really high. From the R2P approach, the UN made a huge failure in the region of Yei, which is the region with a red circle on the map, where an ethnic cleansing of the region was done, as we've mentioned before. Some citizens from that region reported to feel that they had been abandoned by the world because there was no one to help them. The UN finally intervened, but it was too late. Also, the UN decided in 2018 to do an arms embargo on the war of South Sudan, which is seen as a failure, however, is being discussed to strengthen it. On March 2020, the UN decided to extend one more year the UN South Sudanese mission on South Sudan. And personally, we think it is a great opportunity. We think it is a great opportunity because currently South Sudan is in peace. They declared a peace agreement on February 2020. However, it is not the first one, as we can see in the graph on the left, and is seen as a really fragile one by the international community. So currently, the international community has the opportunity to help and pressure for a stabilization of the political situation before the war outbreaks again.
So, after knowing a little bit more about the struggles that South Sudan has faced since its independence, we have extracted two main conclusions. The first one is related to food insecurity. We have seen that more than half of the country's population is facing the risk of starvation. This, of course, is an enormous emergency. But, as it has been mentioned, we see how the government is not looking after its citizens, but after its own interest. Food insecurity is inherently linked with conflict, and, at the end, food is just one of the many weapons of war that exist nowadays. So, it can be considered a weapon of war because forced starvation on population have devastating short, medium, and long-term effects, harming disproportionately vulnerable people. South Sudan fully depends on humanitarian aid when talking about food security. But, as Adrià has mentioned, humanitarian aid in a conflictive country is very dangerous. One of the biggest emergencies that the country is facing is starvation, and with this fragile and recent peace, it does not seem that the life of South Sudanese is going to improve.
And secondly, we've concluded that the external help to stabilize new countries must be revisited because the lack of it has provoked at least two civil wars that we have mentioned. Firstly, in Sudan when the British power left, and also decades later when South Sudan became an independent nation. This brings us to the debate we wanted to suggest. Which role do you think should the international community have on the creation of new nation states? We are aware it's a really broad, complex issue, but we think it's key to revisit it again. And that's all from us. We hope it was clear, and thank you very much.